Hello, everyone, and welcome or welcome back. Before we get into our main discussion for today, I want to talk about a social media platform that I've been using more recently. I've used it on and off for the past couple of years, but I've been finding myself having a lot of fun with it. And I just don't think that it's talked about a lot when it comes to the conversation of social media in general. And maybe that's because a lot of people, or at least some people, don't really consider it as social media, but rather more of a social network. And I wouldn't say that it's underrated, but maybe just more overlooked because of that fact. I also think that it's simultaneously one of the best and worst social platforms out there. And I'll get into why, but I'm talking about Reddit. So if you don't know what Reddit is, or if you know what it is and you're just not too familiar with it, when you join Reddit, the main purpose of it is to join these communities known as subreddits. And on these subreddits, you can do pretty much anything that the rules allow. Like, you can have discussions, you can ask questions, you can post memes or serious things, pretty much anything that you want to for the most part. And what these subreddits are actually about can be pretty much anything and everything. It can range from your favorite TV show or your favorite book or movie series to something like religion or certain philosophies or hobbies or interests that you have or food. It can genuinely be just about anything in existence. There's probably a subreddit for pineapples if you look hard enough. Like, I really mean everything. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about why I think it's both really good and really bad. And I'll start with the good first, which is rather unlike me, but I'm feeling pretty good today. What I like the most about Reddit is the fact that it's focused on community rather than actual people or individuals. What I mean by this is that on Reddit, you can't really follow people, and also the fact that being anonymous on Reddit is highly encouraged. The vast majority of people who use Reddit don't use their real names, and I don't think there's any rules against it, but it's just not really the type of environment that you would really want to do so in the first place. So I think that's why a lot of people just avoid it in general. Another thing that I really like about Reddit, assuming you're on your home timeline, you pretty much only see what you actually want to see, and the fact that there's so many different ways to filter the content that you see in general, which is something that a lot of other social medias don't do. Because a lot of the time on other social medias, you'll get stuff from people that you aren't even following in the first place, or things that just aren't related to anything that you're interested in whatsoever. But with Reddit, I would say that's generally not really a problem. There is a more general view of Reddit that will show you the top posts of the day or the most trending posts. But the thing is, you can switch back and forth, which again is something a lot of other social media platforms, they just don't have that option. The last thing that I'll say about Reddit that I like is again going back to the fact that you can find literally anything and everything that you could ever possibly want on Reddit. But it can also be a pretty handy tool in a lot of situations because people like to ask questions a lot on Reddit, and it's basically kind of turned into the new Yahoo Answers. Like how you used to type a question into Google, and then when you searched it, you would find somebody on Yahoo Answers from 2003 who asked the same question, and somebody eventually responded to it. That's pretty much a large portion of Reddit these days. Basically, just another reason why I like it. Now, to get into the bad side of things, I think that there's really only one thing that is Reddit's major downfall, but I just didn't really know how bad it was going to be until I actually saw it for myself. But I would say that there's some truth in the stereotype that Reddit is an extremely toxic place, because a lot of the time it really is. Now, obviously, pretty much every single corner of the internet is going to have its toxic people, but for some reason, Reddit seems to be the place where they all convene at once. A lot of people are just so rude and mean-spirited on Reddit, whether it's provoked or not. Like, people will just call others out of their name and shame people and just make others feel less than for literally no reason. I think a part of it is the fact that debates are very common on Reddit, and so I think by association of that, it kind of harbors this hostile, kind of negative energy to begin with. But there's ways to have civil discussions and talk about things that you disagree with without being hostile towards each other. There are other minor annoyances that I have with Reddit, but this is definitely the biggest one. Although Reddit can be a very toxic place, I do have to give credit where it's due because it has picked me up a lot of times when I've been down, mostly due to the help of random strangers who have given me perspective and advice, especially when it comes to deeper topics, something like existential crises, which is going to bring me into the main topic for today. I think that I've had more existential crises in my 23 years of life than the average person has probably had in their entire lifetime. I have had a very tumultuous relationship with not just my personal existence, but also the human experience and existence in general. Because whenever I get caught up in my little bubble of existence, I try to take a step back and see the bigger picture and try to realize that this whole life thing is so much bigger than me, but oftentimes, what it actually does is it really just only makes it worse because now I have even more to think about. But on the same end, I know that it's not only about me, and I don't want to get lost in my own world. And so I know that it's important to find a balance between the two, but in all reality, it's just never that easy. In the past, there have been a lot of times where I've got practically, if not literally, zero sleep at night because I just think of things like what my purpose is and how did we as a human race come to be in the first place, and how did the universe even find its way into formation, things like that. And this hasn't happened recently. It's also not a frequent occurrence, but when it does happen, it makes me wish more than anything that I just had the answers and that I could finally put my mind at ease once and for all. But since I can't do that, I figured what I can do is talk about my perspective on a couple of facets of existentialism and the human existence in general. And maybe we can at least try to alleviate some of our worries and even learn something about ourselves in the process. The age old question, possibly life's greatest mystery, is what is the purpose of life? And as old and overused as this question is, I still think it's a really good one. And if anyone really knew the answer, it wouldn't still be asked to this day and probably for the rest of time. This is also a very multifaceted question that can be taken on from a lot of different angles, but I just want to focus on the individual person for now. I think that it's in our nature as human beings to want to feel some sense of belonging or some sense of purpose, to feel like we have some reason for existing. Even if we don't actively think about it, it's something that has probably crossed most people's minds at some point or another, and for good reason, since we don't have any kind of guidance from anyone, or anything for that matter, outside of ourselves. For me personally, it's certainly done a lot more than just cross my mind, because I feel like I have been searching for some kind of purpose for as long as I've been able to comprehend the concept of existence and having a purpose. But to me, there's two different perspectives that I think we can look at this from when it comes to finding our own individual purpose. The first being that our own individual purpose can be whatever we want it to be. And it doesn't have to look like a certain picturesque example of what we might oftentimes think. What I mean by this is that when we think of our purpose, more often than not, our purpose is tied to our career or our job, our family, or how quote unquote successful we are. And that's not to say that if that's what you believe you're here on this earth for, if that's what you're striving to achieve, then that's not to say that you're wrong for that or anything along those lines. But in my opinion, I think that we tend to have this limited view on what life's purpose can actually be. Practically everything that exists has some kind of meaning only due to the fact that we assign a meaning to it. So I might ask the question, what if we applied that same philosophy to our own purpose? As an example, if you feel that your purpose in life is to dedicate your career to researching and curing some kind of chronic illness, then that's great. But if you feel like your purpose in life is to pet as many cats as you can in your lifetime, then who's to tell you otherwise? I just don't think that it has to be this grand endeavor or this ultimate goal that we need to meet, and it also doesn't need to fit into the standard that we set for ourselves. But also, it doesn't have to be anything. It can just be nothing at all. Which brings me to the second perspective that I want to talk about, which is what if we just simply don't need to have a purpose? Just like we should have the option to make our purpose anything we want it to be, I think that we should also consider the option to just simply not have one. I think that if we just want to coast through life and just live until we die without feeling the need to fulfill something greater, then that should be perfectly acceptable. At the end of the day, we're here regardless of if we want to be or not. And so we should have the autonomy to decide our own fate and make our lives mean whatever we want it to mean. I don't mean to be too pessimistic here, but we are quite literally born to die, and we all face the same inevitable ending, so why don't we just make the most of it, or not if that's what you choose. I'm not going to spend too much time on this particular segment because I may make a full episode about it sometime in the future, but I don't think that we can talk about the human existence without talking about the, say, impending doom that is a certainty among basically every single living being, because it's just as much a part of life as life itself, which is death and all the anxiety that comes with it, for a lot of people at least. Obviously, death is the complete opposite of existence, but in reality, they have a lot to do with each other, at least depending on your beliefs and your view of death itself. So, not only are we trying to live with a purpose and fulfill that, but also doing so before we die, but also how the choices that we make can affect whatever might happen after we die, or how it may even affect others. And then there's death anxiety. There's just a lot that goes into it. But all I really want to say here is that I think separating death from this whole idea of existence into its own separate thing would probably be beneficial to those of us who struggle with the idea of death and how it relates to how we live our lives. Significantly easier said than done, of course, but I think if we're able to do that, it'll just make everything so much easier. To tie it all together, make everything come full circle, we should talk through how to overcome these existential crises that many of us are faced with, or even how to prevent them altogether. Something that I've read a lot when I get into my rabbit holes of searching the internet for other people's thoughts and opinions and answers to questions I know I'm never going to find, such as when I search on Reddit, for example. What I do find is that a lot of people say that as you get older, you just start to not care as much about these things, and you inevitably become more accepting as a result. And I think that I've started to realize that as the years go by, this really is becoming more and more true. I find myself thinking less and less each year of what it means to be alive and purposes and death and all of that. And I start to fully believe that life is really just what we make it, and it doesn't have to be anything more than that. We can do all the introspection, reflection, all the learning, all the soul searching possible, but we may never come to a conclusion as to what our lives actually mean or what our purposes are. So as the days go by, I'm getting more and more comfortable with the fact that we will probably never have some kind of grand answer from the cosmos that will resolve our worries and anxieties and answer all or any of life's biggest questions. It's been said that time heals all wounds, and I don't fully believe that. But in my view, this is one of the instances where I do think that this can at least have some truth to it. Regardless of our individual stories, we're all going to have the same ending, so when it comes down to it, let's just try to focus on what we do know, which is right here and right now, because at the end of the day, there really is no time like the present. That's about all I have for this week. As always, thank you so much for listening. If you want to support the show, you can follow wherever you're listening. You can also leave a rating or review. You can follow me on Twitter at HoldItInPod. Or if you have any feedback, suggestions, or just about anything else, you can email me. The email address is holditinpod@gmail.com. But until then, I'll see you all next week.